Hello again, everybody, and welcome back to 50 by 50. Whatever happened to the Harvard class of 1976? The bicentennial class, let's not forget. I'm your host, Michael Conniff. I'm a member of that class. I am super happy to be here today with my good friend, Peter Heilbroner. Hey, Peter, good to see you.
How you doing, Mike?
Peter and I have stayed in pretty good touch over the years. Not perfect touch, but we've been stayed in each other's homes not long ago, and communicate and plan trips and things like that. So it's great to have you. Peter is a pediatric neurologist in private practice in New Jersey, and he is also an incredible guitarist and band leader. We're going to hear about that. That's very exciting. And also can I call you a world-class bird watcher? Are you that level?
I guess it would depend how you define it. I'm world traveled. I don't think world class.
World traveled. Okay, we'll get it. We'll get into
We'll get to that in a bit.
Peter, I'm going to let you start with the story of how we met.
So I came to Harvard. I'd been to Putney, which was a very different kind of school, sort of a used to be considered a progressive school.
Hippie school.
Guess it still was, yeah, sort of. And but I somehow got into Harvard, and I showed up, and I had a very different background from my roommates, who were very nice people, but we were just different, and I felt kind of isolated, and I think wandered up the first or second night to Radcliffe with them, and you and I sat next to each other on the steps in the Radcliffe Common, and I started chatting, and it turns out that your brother is a close friend of a friend of mine from high school, and that was you were my first bond, and so everything fell into place after that. So thank you, Michael, for that, among many other things.
Well, I think it was just dumb luck for both of us, Peter. My brother Tony is a musician in New York. One of his best friends, going all the way back, was Michael Tanner, who also, like yourself, became a doctor. And when we met on the steps there, of course we were at Radcliffe looking for girls. Let's be honest. I mean, why would it's a long walk? It's a long walk from Harvard Yard. And
well, I don't know. At that age, I think you're always looking for girls.
Yeah, you're always looking for girls. But there were no. Now we didn't meet anybody, but that's the way it goes. But what was interesting is when we came, I don't know if it was that night or nights later. You came over to say hello in Stoughton, and across the hall were Giles Whalen and Jeff Moley, and the four of us became great friends. And you in particular really became best friends with Jeff, who I've talked about a lot on these podcasts, actually. He died at age 64 very tragically and suddenly. And we'll maybe talk a little bit about Jeff, and as others have talked about, classmates who have passed away. But that was really it, right? I opened the door across the hall, and I never saw you again. Not really. But Jeff was very much an Eric Clapton acolyte, and you were very much a Jerry Garcia acolyte, I think. And so you were two very different guys with different styles, but a mutual love of music, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think we both Jeff and I evolved a lot musically during the course of Harvard. He learned to appreciate jazz a little bit earlier than I did, and really he and Robbie Kraft really taught me how to appreciate that kind of music. And it slowly evolved so that by the end of my time at Harvard, I really had the jazz bug, which I still have.
Yeah, which usually never goes away.
Yeah.
No, but that's great. And but so music was central. I want to go back to Peter. I remember very specifically being in your apartment in New York City when you told me that you were going to go to medical school, and I was surprised a little bit. We had been out a few years by then, so you were a few years older than the other doctors to be I knew. But I'd really be interested if you could kind of take me through what your Harvard experience, that led you to that. I want to point out one other thing. Peter's father was and is a very, very distinguished economist named Robert Heilbroner, who wrote a best-selling book that just kept selling and selling and selling, called
The Worldly Philosophers.
Worldly Philosophers. And your dad was. I stayed at your house in the vineyard once that had all of his books, so I read a bunch of stuff that he wrote, and he really was a terrific writer. No,
He was a great writer,
Yeah.
and
full
anyway.
stop.
But
Yeah.
I'll try and make the journey to medicine succinct. So first of all, I never had any doctors in my family. So being a doctor didn't sort of come as sort of a first thought to me when I thought about my career. Honestly, I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life when I got to Harvard. I did have an interest in biology, though. We'll probably talk about this later, but I've always been a bird watcher, and so I always liked the animal kingdom and bio and things like that. And then my father was, as you mentioned, sort of a social scientist, intellectual, more than an economist, really more of a social historian. So I ended up majoring in history and science, and my thing was the history of biology or history of evolutionary theory. That's what I did. One of the classes I took there was in the anthropology department from Melvin Connor, who later wrote this book called On Becoming a Doctor. And he was actually an anthropologist, but his book was about his class was about neuroscience. And it was actually the first introduction I ever had to human neuroscience and neurosurgery and things like that. And I just remember thinking back then, wow, this is really interesting. Maybe, this would be something I could do someday. But for whatever reason, I really didn't think of myself as becoming a physician. Well, let's jump ahead a little bit. When I finished, I still wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. And I said, I'm just going to take a couple of years off and be a musician. And I taught guitar lessons for a living around Cambridge. I led a band up there. I led my own group. And I also, towards the end, started doing some freelance science writing. And I stumbled across some neuroscience topics, which I wrote about. Then I moved to New York and ended up saying, I think I'm going to go back and study this more. And I went to the New School and took some classes in biological anthropology, including from a fellow named Ralph Holloway, who was an expert in the evolution of the brain. And so he managed to get me, or help me get a scholarship to Columbia, where I went and I got my PhD in anthropology, and my area was the evolution of the brain. And I really thought I was going to be an anthropology professor. I enjoyed the work. It was interesting. It's just a fascinating field, anthropology across the board. What I did was fun and interesting. And I ended up, after that, I got a 2-year postdoc up at Boston University in neuroanatomy. So I thought, okay, I'll do a postdoc for a couple of years, publish some stuff, learn some more skills, pad my CV, and so on and so forth, and then I'll get a professorship. Well, it did not work out that way. It was the job market was terrible. Even though I had a good pedigree, I couldn't get any kind of interviews. My friends in there at best were doing adjunct professorships, for nothing in the middle of nowhere. And I was hanging out at that point with Giles Whalen, who was up there. And Giles was a doctor, and he had finished his residency, was doing a fellowship. And I was thinking maybe I should just bite the bullet here and go back and go to medical school and be a neurologist. And but I was already 34. It was a hard decision. It was a tough decision. But I remember on one New Year's Eve, appropriately inebriated, Giles and I were chatting, and I said, I'm going to do this. I'll see how I feel in the morning. And in the morning I said, I'm still going to do this. And I went back and I needed to take some pre-med classes. I really sort of took them at a record speed while I was still doing my postdoc, applied to medical school, and I got in to a couple of places. And that's how I got to be a doctor.
Well, that's I didn't realize it was that you were that age. 34 is a good 10 years plus later than most people started. And when you were 34, you still had to do pre-med, right? So you still had How old were you when you started started the program, the medical program, and what year was that, to just situate us a little bit?
It was 1989, fall of 89, and I was 35.
Right. So we had, graduation for you was 76. So this is 13 years later. So
Yeah.
were you sui generis in your class? Were you by far the oldest medical student, or did you find, was there company of a similar age?
There were a few people who were older than me, not too many. It's interesting. You hear a lot of the interviews when I went to medical school. Everybody was very sympathetic about my age, and they liked the fact that I had a PhD in neuroscience and I had publications and things like that. But everyone was saying, well, we like people with diverse backgrounds and we like older students. And I think they loved hearing themselves saying that, but I don't think it was really that true.
Was there age bias at that point?
Yeah, I think there's always a youth bias in applying to medical school. They want people who are fresh out of college and have a fire in their belly, and also, I think, who are impressionable. But I think one of my strengths, having done other things, was that I brought a little bit of an outsider's viewpoint to being a doctor, which I'm very happy for. Makes me a better doc.
So what in studying anthropology and studying, the neuroscience, the science of the brain, right? What did you find in anthropology that was translatable, or at least usable in medicine and neuroscience?
So that's a good question. There is a branch of anthropology called medical anthropology, which is things like, studying a tribe somewhere and their herbal treatments for diseases or something like that, or even witch doctory or things like that. It's a good question. I think it gave me a broader perspective in terms of, how should I put this, human possibilities. Mm-hmm. So, for example, I see lots and lots of kids of all ages, including high school kids, and some of them are, let's say they're 14 or 15 and they're kind of at loose ends, they're not doing well in school, and there are some people who are in my field who will sort of say, oh my God, well this is not good, this is serious, da 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 da, and I'm sort of saying, well, it's okay to take time to figure it out, and what matters is, are you going to be a happy person, and are you going to be successful, and what do you really enjoy doing? And I don't know if that's an anthropological perspective, but I think having done other things first, before I went to medical school, made me a little less rigid about my expectations for people. Also, I see people from different cultural backgrounds as patients and parents. One thing about being a doc is that anybody can walk through the door. Anybody. And I practice in northern New Jersey, which is very ethnically diverse. There's not a sort of ethnic background that I don't see in my practice. And so I think having studied anthropology is useful in a general sense there.
And so, when I heard you were studying, the brain essentially, and now doing what you do now with young kids, I look at that and I say, well, of course, the brain is interesting. It's interesting anytime I read a layperson's article about the brain or whatever. I usually read those articles. It's very interesting. It seems like it's still terra incognita in a lot of ways. But from your perspective, what specifically was interesting about the neuroscience part of the brain?
You mean when I first got into it, or later on?
Yeah.
When I first got into it, I somehow stumbled across doing a report on music and the brain. I think
okay.
I think it was something like that, and I interviewed a fellow named Howard Gardner, who's
I've got a Howard Gardner story, but go ahead.
Yeah,
Yep.
you know who he was. He was over at the med school. I don't think he had an MD. I think he was a PhD.
No, I don't think he was a doctor.
Yeah, but he did a lot of sort of psychological research, neuroscience research. Fascinating guy. Struck me as sort of a genius. Just had one of these just rapid fire minds.
How did you meet him, Peter? Do you remember?
Boy, I really don't. I'm trying to remember how I got into all that. Just don't remember. Old age.
And what did you learn from him, or what were the questions raised by that relationship?
Well, he talked a lot about music and the brain in the sense of localization. So between him and Mel Connor's class, we talked about what parts of the brain process music and things like that. But he also, he was the first person who talked to me about the right and left hemispheres. And that was a big thing back in the late 70s and 80s when I went to graduate school. And actually my dissertation at Columbia was on the evolution of right and left-sided differences in the brain, and how that evolved in non-human primates up to people. So I think he was the guy who sort of turned me on to that, and that was a really hot topic back then.
Yeah, I do remember that. I wanted to drop in a little Howard Gardner story because it's such a Harvard story. I was in a child care seminar as a freshman with his wife, Judy. I believe it was Judy Gardner, who was pregnant or had just given birth and was, really into motherhood. Most of the people in the class were women, and so we would do the seminar at our house, and we'd be sitting downstairs, and literally all night long we hear, we hear the typewriter upstairs.
Yeah.
And of course, it's Howard Gardner, who's a nobody. And he ended up cooking up this whole new theory of intelligence, right? Multiple intelligences, I believe.
Yes.
Is how it's described. Maybe you can tell us what it was, but why was that inspiring? What was it about? The left. So you started to look at the brain differently after that. It sounds like.
Well, I hadn't really, been a neuroscientist. I wasn't a neuroscientist back then at all, but I had taken Mel Connor's class. I just found it interesting, and I think, to be honest, I think a lot of my intellectual development had to do with coming to terms with my dad's legacy. He was a very powerful person. He was a great writer, as you say. He was a compelling thinker, and so on. And
when you say powerful person, Peter, what is that? What are you referring?
He was a powerful intellect, and he was likable. He could communicate well. He was in demand as a speaker. He was an impressive person.
He was a public figure for sure.
To be sure, and he was for the long back in the 70s. He wrote for the New Yorker, the New York Review of Books. He was really a well-recognized guy, not just in the field of economics and so on. So I think there was some part of me, and this is more probably unconscious than conscious, that was kind of looking to do something my own way that was a little different. And so I would never have done that just for the sake of being different, but I thought that that neuroscience seemed kind of fresh and interesting, and it was different than what he was about and the whole social science background that I was raised in. And so I think that's a lot of what it was. And just the fascinatingness of the brain, and it's still fascinating. It always is.
Many of our classmates became doctors. Both Jeff and Giles, who we've spoken of, were the sons of doctors. It's funny, this sometimes having a parent drives you in a direction. And my father was a journalist. I became a journalist, but I also felt very similar to you did. He was a kind of a commanding figure, though he had passed away when I was really young. And I was like, can I really match what he did as a journalist? And I pretty much decided very early I couldn't, and I didn't want to. And I went into my new media direction, and I went in my own direction as you did. I'm struck by what you said about music and the brain, and that you found your way to the brain, at least in part, through music. Because one of the things I think that's really interesting, Peter, about your life is that you have passions that have not been trivial, and that you have continued to develop and evolve, including music and the bird watching. You married. You had two very successful kids who've grown up successfully, you had a house in Chatham, New York. You had a lot of boxes checked in a good way, and I'm just wondering, what kind of life? How would your life have been different if you didn't have those passions? If you didn't have those things you really cared about and kept doing all these years?
You mean aside from medicine is what you're talking about?
Aside from medicine, yeah.
Yeah. I think that's a good question, and I think I would have found something else, because I don't think it's healthy. I think part of the reason there's so much burnout in medicine is because doctors think of themselves only as being doctors, and I do not think that is a healthy way to go through life. When I work very hard, I'm still working full time. I'll see 20, 25 patients a day on the days where I go to work, and I still even take some night call, though that's going away, fortunately. But and I don't mind any of that, but when I'm not in the office, I'm not in the office. And I do other things, and it clears my mind out, and it gives me a sense of perspective and a sense of humor about the world. Which is...
You're one of the funniest guys I know. You haven't said anything funny yet, so you can work on that. Yeah, we need a little humor here.
All right.
But, Peter has often left me laughing hysterically, telling stories. He's a world-class storyteller. What I wanted to ask about the music. So, had you been in a band in high school before you got to Harvard?
The short answer is no, and I was really not a very good guitar player in high school. I was not a gifted musician by any means, but I've always been a passionate musician, and I've always, if I couldn't get it right the first time, I'd just do it until I got it right. And so I learned a lot from listening, and I got better. And then so by the time I had gotten to college, I was decent, and I got more decent during the course of college. But I've continued to study. Even as recently as 15 years ago, I went back and took classes at the New York Jazz Academy, which in the city here, and met two or three of the guys. In fact, more than that, more than half the people in my octet I met through that. And a lot of them are very well-established professionals, and I've become friends with them, and they eventually joined my group, which I'm extremely grateful for.
Were you in bands at Harvard?
Yeah, I played starting sophomore year. Rich Williams and I played in the Danny Small Band, and we did country influenced stuff and Grateful Dead. And then I played for a few months with Sahara, with Jeff and Jeff Moley and Robbie Kraft. And then the next year I started my own group, which was called Dr. Jazz, maybe prophetic. In fact, I even thought I could have a license plate saying Dr. Jazz, which would be fun.
So you were not just going to be a medical doctor, you're going to be a doctor of jazz.
Well, who knows? And then,
is that like a subliminal medical reference that would come out later?
I don't know. I think I really was my development was kind of organic and not really very intellectually thought through for a long time. It just sort of happened, and I'm sort of glad it did. But in any event, that's sort of a rough summary of the groups. I did play with Jeff and Rob again towards the end of college. We had a group for a few months, Earl and the Strokes.
I remember that group. I saw that group play at one of the Harvard houses, I think.
Yeah.
I definitely remember that group.
It was fun.
And I wanted to mention Rich Williams grew up to be a great architect with stuff in Architectural Digest.
Fabulous. And still has got a great voice and has a great sense of rhythm, great sense of time. Rich is still was one of my dear friends. It still is, and he plays beautifully. So.
And he was in our class, right?
Definitely.
So he's eligible for this podcast. We got to get him on. We had Mary Maha, you might remember.
Yes.
Just did one with her, so we could use another architect. So in terms of your octet, I want to kind of find, see the evolution because I have your CDs. You just came out with a third one. It's you perform under the name of Peter Lewis, right?
The group is the Peter Lewis Octet. I introduced myself as Peter Heilbroner now. I was a little reluctant to do that at the beginning, just because I wasn't sure if people who were going to bring their child to see a pediatric neurologist would be comfortable with them seeing a jazz musician. There's something.
Is there any overlap there?
No, but in any event.
I don't think you had to worry about that. Just between you and me.
So anyway, but I decided my middle name is Lewis, by the way. That's where it came from. So, but by the time my third album came out, I introduced myself on stage as Peter Heilbroner, and it says on the CD, not that anybody buys CDs anymore, but I still put them out, and it says Peter Heilbroner guitar. So
the Peter Lewis Octet is.
And I think Jeff did the same thing. Jeff Moley with his group. It was the Fletcher Moley group or something like that, right?
Right. That was his middle name, I believe. Right.
Yes,
and
exactly.
I have a brother with Lewis as a middle name too, but he's named after Louis Armstrong.
Oh, really?
Yes.
I did not know that.
Father always said was my father wrote a lot of music. He wrote a Saturday swing session column every Saturday for 10 years.
Wow.
He loved swing in particular. Had a little trouble when it went to bebop and what followed, but yeah, I was going to ask you about Jeff's band. So Jeff did a similar thing in the sense that he actually performed. His band was basically a bluegrass band, wasn't it?
He had a bluegrass band. I remember Jeff and I were out of touch for a bit, and then we got back in touch, I don't know, sometime in our 40s or something like that. And I remember talking with him, and he was going to Washington University, or he was a professor at Washington University. He was really an eminent endocrinological surgeon, and he wanted to play music, but he felt that playing jazz was a little too offbeat for to jibe with his medical career.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that. He same sort of concern you had that it just wouldn't kind of line up.
Yeah, medicine can be a very conservative profession, and it just is, and that doesn't mean everybody is, but a lot of people are, and so you tend to tread more carefully. I said that early on my life was more organic, but since I became a doctor, there's been a little bit more thinking things through in terms of what's going to work, what isn't, and that kind of thing. Anyway, but Jeffrey told me that he was going to play bluegrass because he was in the Midwest. It was very popular, and he felt it would not be seen as not suitable or not fitting or whatever you want to call it. But ultimately, his group toward the end of his life was not unlike my group, not as big, but similar music, somewhat similar.
Yeah, I mean, I think I heard him play once, and what I came away with was that it was very hard to play. Like, it was very intricate music, the bluegrass, and it had to be technically very challenging. I think he might have even told me that. And the same thing with what you're doing. So I'm going to describe the Peter Lewis Octet, and then I'll let you do a better job of it. But essentially, you select and all the tunes. I think you write all the tunes, right? Or no, you don't write all of them, but you write some of them.
I write as many as I can, and I arrange the rest.
Yeah. So my point being that you're not just you're writing, you're playing, you're arranging, and an octet is no small challenge in a jazz setup. That's obviously 8 people. That's hard. How did you put that band together, and why did you put it together?
Well, it was. I think what happened was after Jeff died, and this was in about 2017, I believe he died, or 16. I was extremely upset. It was a really sudden, unexpected death of one of my dearest friends, and I was very depressed and upset for some time.
Why were you so upset, do you think? I mean, I sort of know, but people might be interested. What was it about it that it really hit hard?
Well, we had a great deal in common. Our music. He studied anthropology when he was in college. I had also turned him on to birdwatching. So we just had a lot in common, and we had spent a lot of time together. We'd played in bands together. We just had a nice camaraderie, and it was so unexpected too.
Yeah.
I think that's what troubled me. But anyway, after that, I think one of the ways that I kind of got back on my feet emotionally was to say, you know what, I think I'm gonna put out I'm gonna record a CD here. And I had quite a few songs I had already written, and then I started working with Michael Webster, who's a terrific arranger and tenor sax player, who I met through the Jazz Academy, and who still plays in my group, and took arranging lessons from him. And I had actually done a fair amount of arranging after I graduated from college. I had a group in Cambridge, and I learned how to write for 2 horns. But with Mike, we did 3 horns. And then with the second album, which came out 2 or 3 years later, we did 4. And it was a lot of work learning how to do all that kind of thing. By the way, I should add that Mike is also... All of the tunes in the group are not mine. Some of them, a couple are Mike's, a couple are Oscar's, and this latest one. Oscar Feldman is a terrific alto sax player who's a recording artist and a star in his own right, and I'm very lucky to have all these guys in my group. They're really top notch.
And just so non-musical people know, arranging is literally the act of arranging how the instruments work together, sound together, play together. It's a critical component. And you also have become quite a good guitarist, Peter.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
At the risk of mentioning Jeff Moley again, I didn't know this. I hadn't seen you play in a long time until his funeral. Members of his band and his brother Roger and yourself, after the service, played long into the night. And really just kind of improvising and picking up songs that you had maybe not even known, and you were able to sort of within a few seconds kind of figure out the song and then play the song that maybe you hadn't even played before, and do that for like 2 or 3 hours. And I thought that was, wow, this is not the Jerry Garcia I know.
Well, in a way it is. I don't listen to the Dead much anymore, but remember the Grateful Dead were famous for endless jams.
Endless
right?
jams. That's
so I certainly, if nothing else, I knew how to bore people to death by playing for a long time. So I tried not to do that anymore. But but I appreciate you like my playing.
Yeah, it was poignant, and but it was really musically, it was really great. And so let's just another question too about your octet. So what interests me about it, Peter, is that you take it very seriously, and I'm not sure I would even call it a hobby. It's more than a hobby. It's professional in every way, and I'm wondering why is that important to you? Because you could be playing your guitar at home, you could be doing things here and there, but this is like an 8-piece jazz band, so it's much more serious and complicated and better than that kind of approach. So what made you go in that direction? Rather, I've talked to a lot of people who just kind of play around and it's a hobby. It's a hobby. It's not a hobby for you, is it?
Well, it's evolved. I think of it. I guess the best way to answer that is to just think if you're learning any new thing. Let's suppose you're learning how to speak another language, and you say to yourself, well, the first thing I want to do is learn, how to ask where the bathroom is, when I go there, or order at a restaurant or whatever. And then you get to the point, well, I can do this, and so maybe I actually want to be able to ask some questions and have a conversation, and you like it, and then pretty soon you want to be more fluent, and then you start reading the literature. So I think it's just that as you go along, I just was always interested in taking it to the next level. So I think that's what happened.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you've done that. You've done that really well.
Well, thank you.
And I also wanted to ask you, I've said this a couple times, and nobody has disagreed with me. Nobody's quite embraced this idea, but I think we were in college, the class of 1976, at an amazing time in terms of music. We still had Motown, Sound of Philadelphia, soul, R&B. We had full-blown rock and roll happening still at that time. And we had fusion, which you and I and our friends tended to really like. We had Weather Report. Of course, I was obsessed with the Mahavishnu Orchestra. But as a musician, I want to ask you, do you think, is that time kind of bespoke in the history of music where, there are other great moments, obviously, but that one in particular, like there was so much great music and all different kinds of music around back then.
I think it was a really great time. The short answer is yes. I think it was a great time. I think the '60s were a fabulous time too. Just the variety of music that is available back then. It's just it just seems that and I'm sure that this is just the bias of a 71-year-old guy, but the fact is, to me, it just doesn't seem like what you hear on the radio has as much variety as what was around when we were back then. I was Oscar, the sax player in my group, is a huge fan of the Beatles, and even though he's from Argentina and he plays a lot of Latin music, he loves the Beatles. He even just went to Liverpool and went on a Beatles tour. That's how much he loves the Beatles. So I listen to a lot of Beatles tunes. We've done a couple in the group and so on. And he, every time I listen to the Beatles, I say to myself, all those songs are so different from each other. It was so innovative.
Yeah, no, and another thing about our class, I would put it. There's a signpost there musically in our class. I know. I don't even have to ask you. I know you saw the Beatles on Ed Sullivan television show.
Yeah, I did, but I was too young.
I don't have to ask you. You saw it.
Yes.
Right? Everybody saw it. I don't know what the numbers were, but that event in 1964, shortly, after the assassination of President Kennedy, by the way, was kind of a before and after. Then there was the British invasion, rock and roll, the Rolling Stones, Dave Clark 5, Jerry and the Pacemakers, and so on. So I always say, when the topic of dating younger women has come up, I've always said that if they didn't see the Beatles on Ed Sullivan, we're not going to have that much in common, right? That's when our life kind of started. So I want to go from music to your other passion, which is bird watching. And so what's funny to me about this is, like, when I learned you were a bird watcher, and I learned that early on, I was like, well, that's geeky. That's kind of weird. So how did that happen, and how did you get started?
Well, I became a birder when I was around 11 years old, 11 or 12. I used to, as you mentioned, my family had a house on Martha's Vineyard back then. Martha's Vineyard was at that point a quiet little island nobody had ever heard of. I wish it was still like that. Yeah. But it was, anyway, I think I had a butterfly collection when I was younger. In fact, I definitely did. So I found something really fascinating about nature. And then my dad dragged me to a bird walk at the local community center. And it was run by a guy named Edward Shalif, who was quite renowned as a birder. And I don't know if you know who Roger Torrey Peterson was, but he wrote the famous Field Guide to Birds. He was friends with Peterson. And my father, being a very charming, gregarious guy, became friends with Ed Shalif. And the three of us used to go out birding many mornings. aside from the bird walks there, we had private little bird walks. And Ed Shalif kind of took me under his wing, no pun intended, and he basically taught me, how to be a birder. And is it a geeky hobby? Geeky is in the eye of the beholder, but it was.
Yes.
I think the geekiness of it, in a way, was my salvation through high school, because I went to this boarding school and I was a terrible misfit there. I had, my social skills were not sophisticated, to say the least, and I was with kids who were very different from me, and wasn't very popular, but I really enjoyed my birding. And even if I was sort of an outcast, there was some part of me that said, this is sort of who I am, and I really enjoyed it, and I got a lot of pleasure out of it. And I cared about the other stuff, but it gave me kind of a sense of self. So you asked about my medicine and all the other stuff. So I came up with a motto for myself about 5 years ago, which is, medicine is my marriage, music is my mistress, and birding is my church. And that's
Okay.
and that kind of sums it up. I mean, medicine is a very solid profession. It obviously, pays the rent, and it's enjoyable. I wouldn't describe it as passionate, but it's enjoyable, it's intellectually interesting, and it's sustaining, and so on. Music is passionate, difficult, tempestuous, beautiful, and frustrating sometimes. And birding is contemplative, thoughtful, it gets me out of my other thoughts, and is a little bit spiritual. I'm not a very religious person, but it's the closest thing to a spiritual thing that I do. For people who don't know much about birding, there are two wonderful
Which is,
books.
I think, everybody, Peter.
There are 30 million birders in the U.S.
Are you really? Wow.
It is not a rare hobby at all.
Amazing.
There are a lot. I go on these birding trips all over the world, and they are sold out.
I take back what I just said.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, it's fine. It's
Yeah.
again, it's all the same. There are two books about what makes birding enjoyable for those people who like it. One of them is written by that famous Central Park birder. Remember that whole thing?
No, I
Did you
don't.
hear about this? So this
Nope.
was a big news item about maybe 5 years ago. There was a black guy who's a birder, who's the author of this book, Christian Cooper, an African-American guy, and he was in the park birding, and a woman came up to him with a dog, and I think in the Ramble in Central Park where you go
Yeah.
birding, and
Where I used to work.
dogs are not supposed to be off the leash in the Ramble because they, among other things, they disturb the wildlife. So he politely told this woman, could you please leash your dog? And she called the police on him because she thought he was a mugger.
Oh,
Okay.
yeah, I do remember this.
And there was
yeah.
this whole story. Remember the term a Karen? Remember that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, which I had never heard before, and I still don't really get, but it doesn't matter. But anyway, he wrote this book called Better Living Through Birding, which a friend gave to me, and it's a beautiful story. I think he went to Harvard. In fact, I'm almost sure he did. Christian Cooper, but he's an African American guy. He's also an out of the closet gay guy, and he talks about all three things. And he's a very entertaining writer. So I highly recommend it.
And that's how we got Karens. That woman was a Karen.
I still don't quite get that, but anyway.
So my little known fact is my first job ever was as a nature guide in the Ramble in Central Park.
All
I
right.
knew nothing about nature and pretty much still don't. So having me take kids around and tell them, well, this is a tree. This is a leaf. This is an insect. That was the level of it. But it was my first job. I was only about 15. So it's interesting that you've kind of put it in compartment. I'm surprised that there's not more that you wouldn't use passion to describe medicine. Has it always been that way? Really interesting, kind of intellectually, but not the primary thing.
You mean medicine?
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I haven't retired. Here I am about to turn 72, and I'm not planning to retire. I just signed a contract to work for 7 more years.
Oh my God. They're
I
going to
mean,
carry you out of there.
but I like it. It keeps me moving. It's interesting. It's fun. It's nice to have a little extra income and all that sort of thing. But it's not just about the money. It's about the life. That's all really good, but it's not a passion. It's more. I don't think you'd want to be doing something. At least I wouldn't want to be doing something that is a passion all day long. I think I'd burn out. I think I want something that's a little more sustaining. Music is definitely a passion, and birding is just its own thing. It's hard to describe, but it is what it is.
And so I wanted to drill down on that a little bit. As a birder, if you were your mentor took you in hand on the vineyard and was trying to explain to you and show you how to be a great or a good birder, what did he tell? What was the advice?
Well, so what did he tell me? A lot of little things like move slowly. Birds tend to, the whole thing about birding is, especially in the woods, birds are skittish. It's not like going to a zoo. You have to find them. They reveal themselves fleetingly. That's part of the charm of it, is that there's a hunting aspect of it. They're looking for these elusive creatures that may or may not give you this gorgeous view. And so he taught me how to do that. He taught me how to listen, about how to hear the calls, about field marks, which are little. In other words, you catch a glimpse of a bird's tail, and it's a long tail, and that tells you something about the bird, or where its habitat is. How to walk quietly through the woods. All of these little things. And then I'd also I had the Peterson Bird book, and I used to browse it at home. And so I would look through it, and then next time out, I would actually recognize something I saw. Well, anyway, go ahead.
Well, I was gonna mention an anecdote I have. I never went birding with you. I probably should go birding with you. I would learn a lot. But I remember skiing with you, Peter. So we were at Snowmass with a bunch of our friends from Harvard, actually. And you probably don't remember this, but at one point you said to me, "Hey, is it okay if we go up the mountain, basically to the top of Snowmass, because there's this one bird up there that it's only above a certain elevation, which was, who knows, 10,000 feet or whatever it was." Do you remember the bird?
Totally, and I remember the whole episode. It was we went to the top, and they had a bird feeder up there. What the birds are called rosy finches, which are these pink and black finches that only live at high elevations in the Rocky Mountains. And there were tons of them at this feeder. And so I think I added 2 or 3 new species to my list. Just when I had no binoculars, just standing on skis 15 feet away from the bird feeder that was next to the place where everybody else is getting a hamburger.
So how many birds have you identified? Because that's part of being a birder. You log what you've seen, and that's part of the game, right? That's part of the hunt.
Yeah, for most people. It's funny because Nick Botfeld, who's one of our classmates, I discovered like a year ago that he was, maybe even more, that he's a birder. And he signed up for a trip to Brazil with me that we took. And he was a really good birder, and he was really into it, but he doesn't keep a life list at all. So he just doesn't. It's, there are no rules, but most people do. So there's the life list that you have in the U.S., which includes Canada and Alaska, may or may not include Hawaii, depending on who you talk to. When I was a kid, the holy grail was to see 600 species, okay? And I always thought that was something I wanted to do. Now, tons of birders have seen 600 species. A good number have seen 700. I've seen something like 640 in the continental U.S., but also I go birding all over the world, so my total list is something like 2,400.
Oh my God,
that's a
lot.
It is a lot, but there are 10,000 or 11,000 birds. Only 1 or 2 people have seen 10,000. And but I go on these trips, and you tell me I'm a world-class birder, but I go on these birding trips, and there are lots and lots of people who've seen 5,000. And I was even on the trip to Brazil. There was an older guy, I guess I'm an older guy, but an even older guy who had seen 7,600.
Oh goodness, that's
So,
really impressive.
so there are people who take 10, 20 of these trips a year. They're
Yeah,
retired, they have a little extra money, and they go on these birding trips.
they see it, and I want to just point out something about your birding and being with you in nature. So in our case, we've walked on the beach out where I live, and of course there are birds all over the place. And in fact, we walked past an enclosure that's kept sacrosanct for an endangered species called the piping plovers, which are a tiny little bird with little feet, run into just very cute, very adorable type of bird. But what I wanted to mention, walking with you, is for me, who's a city boy like you were originally, it's like it's a whole nother world. Like you're seeing all kinds of stuff. You're making observations. You're telling me things about, well, that bird, that's unusual. That bird never does that. Or you're kind of, I would say that it allows you, correct me if I'm wrong here, Peter, but I think it kind of allows you to have a place in nature in an intellectual but also kind of emotional, spiritual kind of sense.
Totally. That's why it's my church.
That's why it's your church, yeah.
That's why you make it puts you in touch with your primitive self.
Uh-huh.
Just imagine a pre-industrial person, what his life was like. Well, what a lot of so-called primitive people had an encyclopedic knowledge of plants, animals, birds. I go
Yeah.
to I go to some of these trips in South America, and the local guides there, it's just unbelievable what they can see. You're walking through a path, and there are 10 layers of vegetation, and there's some bird you hear calling, and without binoculars, they see this tiny little thing through 20 layers of vegetation 100 yards back, and they use laser pointers to point it out for you. So they'll put the pointer just below the bird so they don't scare the bird.
Yeah.
But it's just uncanny, the knowledge of local people who you see, and who've grown up in the area, and they just know it.
So, Peter, we only have a couple minutes left. You're not an old guy, but you're probably thinking, what are the things I want to do while I still can? I know you spend a lot of time with your kids and go on some really great trips with them. You're a single guy, so that's part of your existence now. What do you really want to still do that you haven't done?
You know, I'm happy doing what I'm doing now. One nice thing about my practice is that it gives me a good amount of vacation time. So I travel a lot. I took a trip to the Himalayas this past October, and I always wanted to do a trekking trip to the Himalayas. So I took 6 months and whipped myself into shape, and somehow managed to get through that.
That's awesome.
I just want to keep traveling the world, see a lot of interesting birds and a lot of interesting places. I'd like to get better at my Spanish. My future daughter-in-law, with any luck, she's only not engaged because of visa reasons, but she'll be coming here soon. She's from El Salvador, and so I'm getting my Spanish better so I can talk with her family more easily. I want to keep getting better at that. I want to keep playing in my group as long as I can, and keep doing medicine within reason as long as I can.
I was going to ask you if the Peter Lewis Octet have they signed a 7-year contract as well?
Well, it would no, but they all seem to like playing with me. We've been playing these gigs up in Harlem at a place called Shrine Music World and Silvana, which are pretty funky joints, though they're great and a lot of fun. We finally got a really proper jazz club gig at Maureen's in Nyack in June. So I'm hoping that we can. I would never not play at Shrine, but I'd like to expand. So that's one little goal, is to expand to a little higher grade of jazz club. That would be one thing.
And what are the dates in Nyack? You said
It's
Nyack,
just June. It's Friday night, June 12th. at
Friday night,
Maureen's.
well, right after the reunion, just continue down to Nyack and see the Peter Lewis Octet featuring Peter Heilbroner.
That's okay.
Yeah,
Mike, this was such a pleasure. Thank you for
thank you, Peter.
having me on. I really appreciate
Thank you,
it.
Peter. And I look forward to seeing you at the reunion and seeing you out here and seeing you in the city. And
Yeah, definitely. And I'll take you birding sometime properly. I'll see you later.
A great friendship. You're a very entertaining guy, Peter. I always enjoy spending lots of time with you. So
The feeling is mutual. Nice chatting with you, Mike.
Okay, see you.
Take
Bye-bye.
care.